Who are you and what do you want?
We are taking her with us.
No! Please help me!
The Curvy Nanny accidentally ended up in the Mafia boss's bedroom and changed everything. A silver locket lies open on a bedside table, its tiny music mechanism frozen mid-note for 3 years, like a held breath that never learned how to exhale. Isabella Moretti doesn't know this yet. All she knows is that the power has gone out across the entire estate, that thunder is cracking against the mountains around Lake Como like something enormous trying to get in, and that somewhere down a hallway she has never walked before, a 7-year-old boy is screaming for a mother who cannot come. She counts doors as she runs. 1, 2, 3. Her bare feet slapping cold marble, her cardigan clutched at the throat with one hand while the other trails along the wall for balance. She has spent 6 weeks in this house and still doesn't know all its rooms. She only knows the sound of a frightened child, and that sound does not wait for permission. The door she throws open is the wrong one. Candlelight. A man half risen from a bed, bare-chested, a hand already moving towards something hidden beneath the pillow before his eyes fully register who has entered. And beside him, on the nightstand, catching the flame's small light, a locket tarnished, its lid cracked, sitting untouched like a wound someone stopped bothering to bandage. Isabella freezes for exactly 1 second, long enough to see the scar beneath his cheekbone, long enough to understand she has just walked into the one room in this house she was never meant to see. "I'm sorry," she says. "I was looking for Mateo." He doesn't answer. He is looking at her the way a man looks at a door he thought he'd locked. What happens in the next 60 seconds will determine whether Isabella Moretti keeps her job, her nephew's future, and her heart intact. Before Lake Como, before the locket, before the scarred man in the candlelit room, there was a pediatric ward in Florence, with linoleum floors the color of old teeth, and a nurse who never once let a frightened child see her own fear. Isabella had a system. She kept peppermints in her left pocket for the criers and a small laminated card of constellations in her right, for the ones who needed something to look at instead of the needle. She knew which 4-year-olds needed to be told the truth and which needed to be told a story, and she never confused the two. Her hands were steady even when a monitor screamed. Her voice dropped an octave when a room needed calming, the way some people's voices rise. She was good at her work, not despite her softness, because of it. Then her sister Chiara died in a car accident on the Via Bolognese on a Tuesday in March, and Isabella inherited a 6-year-old named Matteo, who was not technically her son, and a custody battle that required a lawyer, and lawyers required money that a nurse's salary did not stretch to cover. She did not cry in front of anyone. She filed the grief the way she filed everything, carefully, in order, to be dealt with later, when there was time. There was rarely time. At the agency that placed live-in staff for wealthy families, a recruiter named Signora Bruni looked at Isabella's resume, then at Isabella herself, and said, not unkindly, "The families on this list prefer a certain presentation, but the Bellini position pays triple, and frankly, no one else wants it. There are things people say about that house." Isabella did not ask what things. She noted the dismissal, the pause before presentation, the way Signora Bruni's eyes moved over her body and away again, and set it aside, the way she set aside every small cruelty that had nothing to do with the work in front of her. She had a nephew who needed a home. She had hands that knew how to make frightened things feel safe. Those were the only 2 facts that mattered. 2 days later, she stood at the wrought iron gates of a lakeside estate she had only seen in photographs, a single suitcase at her feet, and pressed the buzzer. The gates opened without a word from anyone. She walked through them anyway. She met him properly 3 days later, in a study that smelled of leather and cold espresso, and she did not know, until the silence in the room told her that she was standing in front of Alessandro Bellini. He did not rise. He did not offer his hand. He was reading something on the desk in front of him and did not look up when he said, "Matteo doesn't take to strangers. I give you 2 weeks before he stops speaking to you entirely, if he hasn't already started." Most people, Isabella had learned, announce their power by making you wait. She did not perform patience for him. She simply answered the actual sentence he'd spoken. "He's already stopped speaking to most people. That's not the same as stopping with me." His pen paused over the page. Not dramatically, a small hitch, the kind only a person who was watching closely would catch. He looked up then, and the scar beneath his cheekbone caught the study's low light, and Isabella did not flinch from it or study it, which was, she would learn much later, the first thing about her he could not categorize. Everyone flinched or stared. She simply met his eyes the way she'd met 1,000 frightened parents' eyes across a hospital bed. Steady, unhurried, entirely present. "You're not afraid of me," he said. It was not a compliment. It sounded almost like an accusation. "I don't know you yet," she said. "I'll decide after." The door opened before he could respond, and Matteo appeared in it, small and solemn in pajamas printed with rockets, a model airplane clutched to his chest like armor. He looked at his father. He looked at Isabella, and then, for the first time in the 3 days she'd been in the house, he crossed the room and held the airplane up to her, wordlessly, the way you offer something to someone you have decided, without explanation, to trust. Alessandro went very still. He had buried every soft thing in himself 3 years ago in a hospital corridor, much like the ones Isabella used to walk. Had told himself that love was a door enemies could walk through, that the surest way to protect his son was to make sure no one else got close enough to matter. He watched his son offer a stranger the one toy he never let anyone touch, and something in his carefully maintained architecture shifted half a degree. Not enough to see, enough to feel. "He hasn't done that since his mother," Alessandro said, and then looked as though he wished he hadn't said it at all. Isabella crouched to Matteo's height, admired the airplane with the seriousness it deserved, and said nothing about what she'd just witnessed. She didn't need to. She had already decided something too, though she wouldn't have called it a decision, more a small door left unlocked. Alessandro watched her leave with his son's hand in hers and made a decision of his own. He did not explain it to anyone, least of all himself. "This one stays." What would you do if the most dangerous man in the room stopped talking, just to watch how his son looked at you? The estate changed in small increments that no single day would have revealed. The way a garden changes. You don't see the growth, only, eventually, the flowers. Matteo began leaving his bedroom door open at night. He started narrating the constellations Isabella taught him, Orion's belt, the soft smudge of the Pleiades, through the car window on the drive to school, and the driver, a broad, quiet man named Salvo who had worked for the family for 11 years and remembered every one of them by their coffee order, rather than their name, began remembering hers instead. Cappuccino, extra hot, no sugar. He started having it ready before she asked. That was the first small thing. The second was Alessandro's study. She found the locket again on a Thursday, dusting a room she'd been told not to enter, and instead of leaving it, she sat with it at the small writing desk by the window and turned it over in her hands the way her grandfather had taught her, decades ago, in his watchmaker's shop on Via dei Neri, back when she was a girl who thought fixing broken things was simply what people who loved you did. The mechanism inside was delicate, corroded with disuse rather than damage. She worked on it for 11 minutes with a hairpin and the kind of patience that had once talked frightened children through blood draws. She did not tell anyone. He gave every member of his staff a Christmas bonus. He gave every guard on the estate a rotating day off, He gave Isabella, without a word of explanation, a key to the greenhouse, the one place on the property that had belonged to his wife, that no one else had been permitted to enter in 3 years. She found him there once, at dusk, standing among dead orchids he had never had the heart to replace or the will to tend, and she understood, watching him from the doorway, that this was not power she was looking at, this was cost. The empire, the guards, the gates, all of it was scaffolding built around a man still standing in the wreckage of a single loss, refusing to let anyone see the wreckage itself. She did not go to him. She left a watering can by the door and walked away, and the next morning, one orchid had water in its soil. Neither of them spoke of it. His second in command, Dante Vitale, took to appearing wherever Isabella and Matteo were, the kitchen at breakfast, the garden at the boys' lesson time, with a warmth that read, to everyone else, as simple kindness. He complimented her patience with the boy. He asked, gently, how she was adjusting to a house so different from her old life, whether the isolation of the estate ever felt like too much. He remembered small details and repeated them back to her with the practiced ease of a man who had learned that people trust anyone who seems to be listening. Isabella answered him plainly and thought nothing more of it, the way she thought nothing of most careful people. She had spent a career learning to read fear in a child's face. She had not yet learned to read ambition wearing a smile. It began with a silence that lasted one beat too long. Isabella noticed it first, the way conversations in the East Wing stopped fractionally when she entered, the way two guards exchanged a glance she wasn't meant to catch when she asked, innocently, whether Signor Vitale had always handled the estate's northern shipments alone. She mentioned it to Alessandro over dinner, carefully, the way you mention a symptom you're not yet sure is worth a doctor's time. Dante's been asking Matteo questions, she said, about me, about where I go on my days off. He asked the boy Alessandro, not me. Alessandro's jaw tightened, but not at Dante. He's known Matteo since he was born. He's protective. That's not what protective looks like, she said, and heard, in the silence that followed, that he had chosen not to hear her. He did not dismiss her cruelly. That was the difficult part. He simply returned, 3 sentences later, to the ledgers on the table between them, and the not hearing was its own kind of answer. A door closing so quietly she almost mistook it for staying open. She stayed anyway. That was her choice, and it cost her something specific. The last of the careful distance she had been keeping, the professional wall she had built between Nanny and this family, my family now. She stayed because Matteo had started sleeping through storms, because the greenhouse had 2 living orchids instead of none, because some doors, once you've walked through them, cannot be unwalked. 2 nights later, Alessandro found her in the hallway outside his study and, without preamble, without explaining himself even to himself, told her something he had not told another living person, that the anniversary of his wife's death was in 4 days, that he had not spoken her name aloud in 11 months, that he did not know how to be in this house on that date without becoming a man his son shouldn't have to watch. He revealed more in the not saying of it, the long pauses, the way his hand gripped the doorframe rather than reaching for her, than any speech could have carried. Isabella said only, "You don't have to be anything on that day except present," and left him standing there, because she understood, with the instinct of someone who had sat beside 100 grieving families, that some moments are not solved. They are simply survived, together or alone. That same night, Dante Vitale made a phone call from the boathouse that no one on the estate was meant to overhear. The viewer cannot yet see how this resolves, neither can Isabella. She found the truth by accident, the way truth usually arrives, sideways, in a document she wasn't looking for. Isabella had gone to the estate office to find Matteo's school forms, and found instead, left carelessly on the printer, a shipping manifest with Dante Vitale's signature and a destination that did not match any port the Bellini business legitimately used. Beneath it, a second page, a memo, drafted but unsent, outlining a narrative to be fed to Alessandro's remaining loyal captains. The nanny has known associations with the Calvetti family. Recommend removal before further compromise of the household. There was no Calvetti family in Isabella's life. There was only a lie, built with the precision of a man who understood that the fastest way to destroy Alessandro Bellini was not to attack him directly, but to take away the one person who had begun, slowly, to make him human again. She did not run to Alessandro. She sat with the papers for a long time in the empty office, the way she used to sit with a diagnosis before delivering it to a frightened parent, organizing the facts, deciding what order they needed to be spoken in, what could wait and what could not. She thought about Dante's warmth in the kitchen, his gentle questions to Matteo, and understood, with a coldness that surprised her, that she had mistaken performance for kindness because she had wanted, in a house built on grief, to believe someone besides Alessandro and his son could be simply good. That evening, she watched Dante from the garden gate as he stood alone at the water's edge, and for one unguarded moment, before he composed his face again, she saw something genuine cross it. Not triumph, but tiredness. A man who had spent 8 years watching Alessandro's father, and then Alessandro, promoted past him for reasons of blood rather than merit, who had built half this empire with his own hands and would inherit none of it, who had convinced himself that removing one nanny was a small, defensible cruelty in service of a larger, almost reasonable justice. It did not excuse him, it made him worse somehow. A man who knew exactly what he was doing and had simply decided the cost was acceptable. She thought of part one differently now. The hand Alessandro had moved toward the pillow the night she'd stumbled into his room. The weapon he kept within reach even in sleep. She had thought it was fear of the world at large. She understood now it was fear of exactly this. Someone close enough to know the house's rhythms, using that closeness as a weapon. She copied the documents. She did not confront Dante. She went to find Salvo instead. The gala at the lakeside villa was meant to be an ordinary evening. A charity auction, candlelight on water, 300 guests in silk and tailored wool. Isabella arrived in a deep green dress that made no apology for the body wearing it, Matteo's hand in hers, and found Dante Vitale already holding court near the terrace, mid-sentence in a story that painted her, delicately, as an outsider whose loyalties no one had properly verified. She did not wait for Alessandro to arrive. She walked directly into the circle of listening guests, set the copied manifest and the unsent memo on the table beside Dante's wineglass, and said, in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as it needed to, Signor Vitale drafted this memo 11 days ago. It names a family I have never met, doing business I have never touched, sent to a port used only for shipments he authorized without Alessandro's signature. I'd like everyone in this room to read it before they decide what I am. The terrace went silent in the specific way rooms go silent when a story has just changed shape in front of everyone watching. Dante's composure cracked, not into rage, but into the particular stillness of a man who has just watched his own plan turned into evidence. You don't understand what you're holding, he said quietly. I understand exactly what I'm holding, Isabella said. I've spent my whole life reading people who are afraid. You're not protecting this family. You're protecting yourself from watching someone else inherit what you built. Alessandro arrived in the middle of it, not to save her, but to find her already standing, already having said the thing that mattered, the crowd already turning toward the truth she had laid on the table before he'd even crossed the room. He picked up the manifest, read it once, and looked at Dante with the flat, terrible calm of a man who has just finished grieving something he hadn't known he needed to grieve. 8 years, Alessandro said. I would have given you anything you asked for. I never thought to ask if you wanted it handed to you instead of earned. He did not raise his voice. 2 of his men, who had watched Isabella cross this terrace 100 times with the boy's hand in hers, stepped forward without being told to. Matteo, gripping Isabella's dress, watched his father's second-in-command escorted from the villa and did not look away, because children, more than anyone, know exactly who deserves to be watched leaving. In the stunned quiet that followed, Alessandro reached into his jacket and drew out the silver locket. Repaired, restored, the one Isabella had fixed weeks ago and never mentioned. He had found it playing that morning for the first time in 3 years, and had carried it with him ever since, unable to put it down. He opened it now, in front of everyone, and the lullaby filled the terrace, small and imperfect and entirely alive. Pause here, just for a moment, because before we see what he does next, ask yourself, how many people in your life have quietly repaired something broken and never once mentioned it was them? He crossed the terrace, took her hand, not to kiss it, not to speak, and simply held it, in front of every guest, every guard, every person who had once assumed she was hired only to mind a quiet boy. The recognition in that grip needed no further translation. 3 weeks later, the greenhouse at the Bellini estate is full of orchids. Not the ones his wife planted, but new ones, chosen by Matteo from a nursery in Bellagio, arranged in careless, joyful rows that no professional gardener would approve of, and no one has any intention of correcting. Isabella kneels in the soil beside the boy, her sleeves pushed up, showing him how to water without drowning the roots, and does not notice Alessandro in the doorway until Matteo does, and calls to him, and for the first time in 3 years, Alessandro Bellini crosses his own greenhouse without hesitation. He does not make a speech. He crouches instead, takes the small trowel from his son's hand, and plants something beside him. Badly, crookedly, exactly the way a man learns to do things when he has decided he is allowed to try. Later, when Matteo has gone in for dinner, Alessandro finds Isabella by the water, the locket in his palm, and sets it into her hand instead of his own pocket, closing her fingers over it without a word. It is not a proposal. It is not a declaration. It is a man who spent 3 years unable to hold a piece of his past, handing it, finally, to someone he trusts with his future. She looks up at him, and the lake behind them is the same lake it was on the night of the storm, except the marble beneath her feet is warm now, not cold, and the door behind her is one she was invited to walk through, not one she stumbled into by accident. Somewhere behind them, a light in the study switches on, and for the first time since his wife died, Alessandro Bellini has left it burning for someone to find their way home by. Isabella never set out to fix a locket. She only refused to leave something broken alone in the dark. Is there someone in your life who has been quietly repairing what you thought was beyond saving, and you haven't told them you noticed? Or are you the one still standing in a room, holding something broken, waiting for someone patient enough to sit with it until it plays again? Tell me in the comments which one you are. If this story moved you, subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper.